everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'll be your host, as always, Matthew Coble, and today we'll be talking with WWT expert Neil Anderson. Neil is an AVP in our Global Solutions and Architecture team. And here at Worldwide Technology, Neil advises many large organizations about global architectures and IT strategies that traverse networking, security, cloud, data, IoT, and automation. In his spare time back home in North Carolina, Neil has a passion for mentoring students, especially those who are in STEM programs like robotics. He's been with Worldwide Technology 9 years, coming up on 10, and he's here with us today. So Neil, welcome. Really happy to have you with us today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Matt. Thank you.
Great to see you too. So jumping right in, the last several years have really witnessed organizations across lots of industries migrate to the cloud, and at a really astonishing pace, right? Especially through the pandemic. But we now learn that once they get there, some organizations really kind of get stuck in a stall. So can you tell us a little bit about the idea of this cloud stall? Why is that happening, and what are organizations doing about that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons that stall can happen. One is that you underestimate the complexity of moving workloads to the cloud and start out maybe with not the best strategy in mind. You just start moving applications and haven't thought about it very well. And so then you experience complexity along the way. Things don't work quite as they thought that they would. And so then the project can go into a stall. Another reason is that sometimes there's not a clear understanding that to really take advantage of the cost benefits of cloud, you really need to think about what are the right applications to move to cloud. And I might have to refactor some of those applications, redesign them for a container architecture or a microservices architecture, something that's more natural to native cloud versus a lift and shift. And what customers find sometimes, if I just lift and shift the same exact application to cloud, it may not be cost advantageous to do that. And so then once they sort of get that first bill, there's a little bit of a hesitation that can cause some stall and say, wait a minute, are we doing the right thing here? I thought this was going to cost us less. So lots of different reasons for it, Matt, but those are some of the ones that we hear about.
Yeah, well, I know that you're clearly an expert at IT infrastructure, networking, cloud computing. So I'm curious, what trends are you seeing in the market today in terms of cloud architectures the organizations are adopting out there? Is there an optimal next generation architecture that many are moving towards? Does it vary from organization to organization? And where does multi-cloud fit into that too?
So it's a good question. So one of the things that happens when a significant portion of applications have moved to the cloud, and I'm talking about employee sort of corporate applications, and we haven't fundamentally changed the way users are connecting to those, you can get into a sort of a poor user experience, right? You may, for example, maybe I'm still bringing people's traffic back to my primary data center before letting it go out to the internet and out to cloud. That hairpinning can have a negative impact on user experience. And so we really need to think about the architecture as a whole. How am I going to get those connections to where the workloads are going to be now and in the future? How am I going to secure the workloads and the sessions that are leading there? And it really does cause us to sort of rethink the architecture. And we're not going to be building the network architecture or the connectivity architecture, even the security architecture, like we used to in the past. We're going to rethink that.
Well, Neil, so if most companies still do have that mix of on-premise hardware, cloud, what are they really doing with that legacy infrastructure? You've got a hybrid operating model, and companies need to really bridge that gap between the two. And I know you work with a lot of our clients on that. And then also introducing the idea of infrastructure as a service models, right? There's a lot of complexity that people have to think about. So I'm curious your take on what are the best approaches there?
Yeah, so let's start with the workload side. So we don't think that every application is going to move to cloud. We think that the right applications are going to move to cloud, and those that need to scale and those that need to take advantage of the advantages that you get when you operate in the cloud make you agile. For example, consumer mobile applications, those make perfect sense to be in the cloud because you get the scale, you're closer to the users that are going to be using those apps, et cetera. But the sort of the crown jewels applications of a lot of companies, those may still reside on premise. So we still think that there's going to be a mix of legacy or traditional infrastructure in the data center running workloads, as well as giving that agility by moving the right workloads to cloud environments. So we think it'll be a mix. We don't see it all going one direction or the other. And I think, so that's from the workload perspective. If you look at it from the connectivity perspective, the connectivity has to evolve as well. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to forklift all of your networking. It just means that you may think about it in a different way. For example, I may still bring traffic back to my primary data center, but I may have that edge router make an intelligent decision about, wait a minute, is this a corporate application that needs to head to the primary data center, or should I let this go out the internet connection and let it go more naturally towards the cloud edge? Making that edge equipment smarter about those decisions about where applications are getting routed. So we still think that there's a role in both the networking and connectivity as well as the cloud workloads, Matt, for that traditional infrastructure.
Yeah, Neil, and I think another aspect of that, workload and connectivity, there's also data. So a lot of organizations need to think about the data that's moving through all of their infrastructure. So I'm curious, how does data play a role in the decisions you make around, what's on premise, what's in the cloud, and what's in more of a hybrid model?
Yeah, and data is gold, right? Data is the real value that most companies possess. And so we do see a lot of situations where, we call it kind of the center of gravity for the data. Where does it make sense for the data to live? And that could depend on a lot of things. That could depend on sovereignty laws, where I have to keep certain data in certain geographies. It could depend on regulatory, conditions where I have to keep data, with a certain security level. It could be that I have a certain risk profile of that data, where if I lose that, or if I lose access to that for a period of time, for example, a ransomware attack or something like that, then I could be out of business, right? So all those decisions have to factor into where I'm going to put my data. It may make sense to put it right with the application workload in the cloud. It may make sense to put it right next to the cloud. And we see companies do that for data sovereignty reasons and other reasons, where you want it as close to the workload as possible, because you don't want to have some big delay between the compute and the data itself. And again, you could have this data that is just so important to your company that you're not going to risk putting it at outside of your own bricks and mortar data center. We see all of those of above, Matt. And the other thing I would say is that performance matters. If you're talking about some of these AI and ML workloads, then it's extremely important to put that data as close to the workloads as possible, because you're talking about very large data sets that have to be computed on with extraordinarily powerful compute power to do the things that we're seeing with things like ChatGPT and GPT and other things.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you more about that later in the show. But all right, so we got a lot of things in play here. We got workloads, we got data, connectivity, on-premise, cloud, everything in between. Another thing that organizations have to keep in mind is cybersecurity, right? And I know have some expertise in that, cybersecurity, SASE, resilience, and all those sorts of things. So speak to us for a minute about how that factors into decisions companies make as well.
Certainly. And one of the things that our customers are struggling with is, if I want to let that traffic go more naturally to the cloud, out of, let's say, a branch office or a home office environment, or even a campus environment, how do I do that while not exposing, that site to additional threats? If I just sort of turn on internet access, direct internet access at a branch office location, I've now turned that office into another internet edge. And if I am not running the same security stack that I was running in my corporate data center, in my DMZ environment, now I've got an issue, right? I could get attacked, what we call sort of a horseshoe attack, where I attack a branch, I get access to that, and then I just find my way up the wire to corporate locations. So that's a real problem, is how do I scale security out in kind of a distributed enterprise model like that? It's extraordinarily challenging, and we think that it's probably not practical to do that with sort of traditional technologies like a physical security stack. The technology that we see coming into play that we're really excited about is the Secure Access Service Edge, the SSE or SASE. And what that does is it essentially puts a very scalable global DMZ next to the cloud edge that you can manage policy in one place. and it's not going to impede your user experience when you're trying to get those sessions to the cloud securely. So we think it's kind of the best of both worlds. I get a very manageable, scalable, distributed enterprise security model, but I can manage it in one place next to the cloud. And that's why we see customers really starting to strongly invest in SASE, especially when they're, when they're adopting cloud, Matt.
Well, Neil, I want to ask you a little bit about some of the different people involved here, and so I'm imagine that the CISO is interested in obviously security in general, but SASE. We've also got I'm sure you're speaking with CTOs, CIOs, business leaders. Like how do you get the different parties who are involved in this to make sure that they're aligning on all of these factors that we're talking about today?
Yeah, it can be really challenging, especially for large organizations where those functions like network, security, cloud ops are all separate departments led by separate leaders in the company. It can be really challenging, but we've never before seen those organizations having to work closer together. I was just talking with a number of our CIO and CISOs from customers a couple of weeks ago, and they confirmed to me, they said, look, I've never before worked closer with my peers in security, in network, in cloud to accomplish some of these, because what's happening here is not really a technology adoption. What's happening is really an entire architectural transformation around cloud that is also affecting the security model, the connectivity model, the user experience model. And so it's really transformative, Matt, and those organizations have to work close together. What's interesting is we find that as WWT, we can bring those organizations to the table and have that conversation. And that's often what we find ourselves doing. We start out perhaps talking to the network team, and then we have the same exact conversation with the security team. We bring those parties together and start to form a joint strategy about, okay, how are we going to help you transform and get this long-term architecture that you really need to be successful in cloud?
Well, Neil, as we listen to cloud, we also hear in the market that organizations think about cloud optimization, and that's a priority. I'm curious if you could sort of describe, how organizations approach that. Are they, kind of making mistakes that they're trying to overcome now with the cloud architecture? Is it just evolutions in workloads, data, connectivity that they have to move forward? Like, what causes the need for that, and how do people approach it? What are they thinking?
Yeah, I mean, some organizations are doing well, others are not doing so well. And I would say the challenges that we see are when an organization, sort of takes the same approach to cloud as they were taking in their on-prem data center, right? They're trying to apply the same operating model. And it really is a different operating model. You really need to think about, we call it the cloud operating model. And you need to think about it in those terms. And that has a lot of different pillars to it, including my financial, my performance, and the planning and strategy has a lot of different things you need to think about. And so when we think about optimizing cloud, we think about it as that, do I really have that, cloud center of excellence in my organization? Do I have that operating model down pat that I can, my people are thinking that way, and that's how they're operating in cloud. And so it's super important. And when we see that not happening, then you see things like cost overruns, unexpected surprises happening, or cloud stall happening because there wasn't a plan to, sort of approach it as a complete cloud operating model, if that makes sense, Matt.
And Neil, I know that a lot of business leaders are thinking about deeply about the experience they deliver. And it's just the digital world that we live in, and we really need to optimize both employee experiences and customer experiences, those end user experiences that we love in our day-to-day lives. How does cloud factor into that, and how organizations think about kind of optimizing cloud to really deliver those great experiences?
Yeah, and one way that cloud does that is just by being so scalable and being so global. People think of the cloud as one destination, but it's actually many destinations spread out around the world, so that, proximity is the key to user experience. You've got to get applications as close to the user access as you can. and not far away, right? So proximity becomes a really important concern, especially for user experience. And so the faster that you can let somebody connect directly from where their end user device is to where the application's running, the better experience they're generally going to have. And so that's what we think about when we think about user experience, and all these concepts that I've been talking about around, optimizing for cloud, adopting a distributed security model, not hairpinning through your data center, letting traffic go more naturally. All those things contribute to user experience and getting a great user experience. And that's really super important, especially when you're trying to retain and attract employees in a really tough hiring environment. You want to make sure your user experience as an employee is super solid, as well as your customers. And so we're seeing the emergence of technologies like really getting focused around digital experience monitoring. How can I actually measure the experience someone's getting from their device the whole way to the application? And if that experience does suffer, then how can I really quickly mitigate so that I've got a good experience again? That's becoming one of the most paramount parts of cloud adoption that we're seeing, really.
All right, Neil, well, another thought around cloud optimization is the idea of multi-cloud, and really thinking through, as you're optimizing your cloud, like how do you get to the right next generation architecture that's really the right best place to be? And I think for some, multi-cloud plays a role in that, and others maybe not. So what's your take on that?
There definitely can be a role. We see customers that do think about, I'm going to take advantage of multiple cloud providers because of different reasons. One could be cost, one could be, hey, there's capabilities in one of the clouds like AI and ML capabilities that I want to take advantage of. And so I'm going to put some of my workloads here in this cloud, but I'm going to put some of these other workloads over here where I want some of this special capability. But there is, we do hear from organizations, there's also a cost in doing that. You have to now train people on those multiple platforms, and that can be a little bit more expensive to have that expertise across those different clouds. Typically, the cloud platforms are, you build expertise in one of them, and if you get deep on that, can, you can make a career out of that. There's a lot to learn about those different platforms. Learning multiple of those, again, we often see people that are, I'm an expert in this one. You see a different person that's an expert in this other one. So you're almost building kind of parallel teams in some cases. It's hard to learn all of them, right? There's just a lot to learn there. And so it can be additional cost for our customers, but all those things go into consideration. Do I need to go multi-cloud because I really want to take advantage of the cost elements or the capabilities there? And is that more than it's going to cost me in terms of now I'm going to have to train up people on multiple cloud platforms?
Well, Neil, another term that we're hearing with respect to cloud on the marketplace is the idea of cloud edge. And I know that that's important for a lot of industries, but particularly healthcare, gaming, autonomous vehicles, and others as well. Tell us what cloud edge means and how do organizations need to be adopting that?
Yeah, and the way that I think about cloud edge is that there are certain applications that just lend themselves to tremendous amounts of data at the edge or out there where that's being captured, and then the need to process that data and then make very, very quick decisions upon it, right? So, for example, I could have Cloud Vision is one that comes to mind for me. If I want to have analytics going out there with a video surveillance camera, let's say, I want to very quickly be able to process those images, probably run them through an AI ML engine to act upon that or make a decision or discover what's going on in that image. I may have to do something that's a really quick turnaround for alerting or changing a command on a device or something like that. Then I need to move that compute as close to that massive amount of data collection as I can. And that's why we think about the cloud edge, and cloud compute can be part of that. Putting data out there can be part of that, just trying to react to that. And you mentioned another one, Matt, is autonomous vehicles. You can't necessarily wait for all of that data to come back from the car the whole way to a centralized place where you're going to discover what's going on and then send a command back out to the car to do something else, right? You've got to have that very close to as close to the vehicle as possible. And so that's what we're thinking about now when we're thinking about cloud edge. And there's a lot of emerging applications that you're starting to think about that, where you have this concentration of a massive amount of data collection and the need to act on it very, very quickly.
Well, yeah, and in another area like that, I know that a lot of talk at our recent Customer Advisory Council was around ChatGPT, generative AI, language learning models, and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit about how cloud remains very important in the infrastructure that people are building with cloud to support all the excitement and enthusiasm we have in the marketplace around artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's a really exciting field, and I tell you, we're learning a lot about this. And if you think about AI and ML workloads, they're really starting out in cloud. Most people don't have the wherewithal to invest in their own capability, right away, at least. And so they're experimenting with that technology in cloud. But we think that as this evolves, and you think about the organization, they're going to, eventually figure out, like, hey, I want to run my business on this sort of mission critical AI ML workload because I'm now putting my business intelligence in that. And so we think what's going to happen there is some of those workloads may move on premise. We may see our customers building out their own dedicated AI ML workload stacks. And that's typically going to be a different technology than that's out there today as far as servers, and compute go, as far as storage goes, and as far as networking goes. Typically, those workloads require what we call a high-performance architecture, where you're talking about really fundamentally different compute processors from someone like NVIDIA is the leader in that space. High-performance storage that acts super, super quickly, as well as networking that can then transfer that data back and forth between compute and the storage and wherever else it needs to go. And so that's what we think about when we call it high performance architecture. And those are now being built in cloud. And I look at those largely today as experiments, a place to play with that, a place to learn about the technology, and it may be a place to instantiate it in production as well. But we also think that there's going to be a need to instantiate some of that on-premise in the data centers as those things become more mission critical to the organizations that are our customers.
Well, Neil, it's always a pleasure. I very much appreciate you joining us today, spending some time with us and sharing your expertise. Delighted that you're out in the market with our clients out there. So thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Matt, and anytime.
Yeah. And thank you for joining as well. It's been another great WWT Expert session. Plenty more on the calendar up ahead and lots in the back catalog, viewable on demand at wwt.com/events. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.